joining us. So Tista is working in the framework of the Challenging Inequality Chalinek Research Project. She obtained her PhD in economics from the ESSEC Business School in Paris in collaboration with the Université de Cergy-Pontoise in France. Her research focuses on inequality issues through the lens of distributive justice, particularly in the context of developing countries and emerging economies like India. Her current work at CSH aims at appraising inequality of opportunity and the efficacy of certain policies to equalize opportunity in a hierarchical social setup, both in India and in Europe. One particular interest that she has is in the Indian context, is to further analyze opportunity equalization among various social groups, including castes, as well as the potency of caste-based affirmative action policies in India. And today her discussant will be Dr. Himanshu, who is an affiliated researcher at CSH, but also an associate professor in economics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. His primary area of research is development economics, with a focus on issues related to poverty, inequality, employment, food security, rural development, and agrarian change. His recent publications include How Lives Change, Palanpur, India, and Development Economics, with Nicholas Stan and Peter Langeau, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, forgive me, which is based on the longest longitudinal survey of Palanpur, which is a village in Western UP, which has been surveyed intensively 7 times, starting from the first survey in 1957-58. Himanshu is also a regular contributor to various media publications and has been involved with various government committees, including the expert group on measurement of poverty. I'm not citing all of them here because there are too many. So the title of today's presentation by Tista is Inequality of Earning Opportunity in Indian Society. So Tista, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Lawrence, for the introduction. So we are already late. Without further ado, I just begin. This is a work from my PhD, but my PhD work was with an older database, so I have changed anything, and it is a joint work with my supervisor, Arnaud Lefranc. So before going directly to my research agenda, let me just first begin with some facts regarding inequality across the world. Well, global inequality between the countries have indeed declined, particularly since the late 20th century. And one of the main reasons for that is the faster growth of relatively poorer countries, and particularly India and China. But over the same course of time, we see also an increase in inequality within the country. And that primarily because growth in the poor countries or the emerging developing countries, they are far from being inclusive. Indeed, the share of income of the top 1% in the national income of the country, it has increased quite disproportionately faster than the bottom 50%. Therefore, while a faster growth rate of the developing or emerging countries result in some convergence of global inequality, at the same time, the disproportionate distribution of growth among the richest section of the country, it leads to a divergence of inequality within the countries, widening the gap between the rich and the poor. And therefore, high time.
Why don't you select and write them?
So therefore, it is high time to arrest this divergent spreading of inequality within the country, so as to make the growth and development sustainable. In fact, that is why the Sustainable Development Goal in 2017 has emphasized both on reducing inequality between the countries and within the countries as well. And for that purpose, inequality has been studied from multiple perspectives. For example, the whole school of Thomas Piketty and Lucas Chancel and all, they are drawing attention towards the skewed wealth distribution of the top 1%, suggestive of some kind of tax restructuring. Some exploring the complementary role of other things like crime rate, environmental degradation, political stability, health system, how they affect inequality. It has also been studied on behavioral front in an experimental setup. Some analyzes intergenerational persistence, and inequality of opportunity is also another such attempt. And that at present is a very, very growing field, particularly in empirical economics. What it does is it looks behind the inequality generating process to isolate or rather prioritize ethically objectionable aspect of inequality that is strictly unfair from the perspective of egalitarian justice. So how it differs from the usual analysis of inequality? Well, traditionally, social welfare is assessed on the basis of equal distribution of an outcome across everyone in the society. So the social objective was to maximize the aggregate individual outcome. However, this way of analyzing inequality has been questioned by many eminent philosophers and economists, particularly since the late 20th century. And the main common point of their criticism is that inequality is generated by a highly heterogeneous process, and a flat target of equalizing income or any outcome for that matter, apart from being very less likely, it is not always very desirable too. So they're all putting their perspective on building up a platform that one can think of equalizing and accordingly devise the social contracts. For some, the platform is like equality of rights, of resources, and probably you're familiar with the famous lecture of where he was talking about equality of functionings or capabilities, etc., etc. And these debate gradually brings the role of responsibility in the inequality generating process with the idea that people should be held responsible for their preferences and not for things that they cannot control by themselves. Roemer takes this philosophical debate in the domain of economics by formalizing the concept of equal opportunity as a situation when there is no inequality coming from factors beyond individual responsibility or beyond individual control. This is, however, hardly the case for any society, so inequality of opportunity prevails, and the society should immediately act to level the playing field so that everybody, irrespective of their caste, class, creed, gender, ethnicity, etc., that they cannot control, they should get an equal chance in life. However, to do that, it is important to have a workable definition, a canonical structure of equal opportunity, so that we can devise econometric strategy and quantify the extent of inequality of opportunity, because what gets measured gets done. So first, let me define the formal concept of inequality of opportunity, structurally. Well, among all descriptions, I find the one more catchy as put forward by the senior economists of World Bank, Francisco Ferreira. I think he's no longer in World Bank. It's probably moved to LSE. So he says that inequality of opportunity is to think as the cholesterol of inequality, which is really, really bad part of inequality, and any healthy society should get immediately rid of that. However, jokes apart, the uniqueness of inequality of opportunity is that it first lifts the curtain of inequality, peeks into the backstage to investigate the reason behind inequality, and while doing that, it takes a moral stand to classify the inequality generating factors into two broad, mutually exclusive boxes. So there are the effort factors. For those, one can arguably be held responsible for, one can regulate these factors. On the other hand, there are the circumstance factors that are also responsible for inequality, but that are outside subjective control. And in this framework, inequality of opportunity is the inequality that is generated by differences in circumstances and not effort. So, like I mentioned here, we can think of the outcome generating process, why here is any outcome, as a function of circumstance and effort. And since often effort is unobservable, we can simply think of outcome as a function of circumstances. And our objective is that the cumulative distribution function, which is a technical term, that is the outcome distribution, the actual outcome distribution, it should not be conditioned by circumstances. That's why I write f of y, which is the outcome distribution, that should be equal to the conditional distribution. By conditional, I mean conditional on circumstances. However, then again, this is not the case, and we have a gap between the actual distribution and the distribution conditional on circumstances. Once we can see this gap, once we can assess this gap, then we can also measure, get some kind of quantitative measure possibly of inequality of opportunity. And for this purpose, we can actually use, the good news is we can use the already built up rich arsenal of inequality analysis. I will come to that while I will be discussing my methodology in detail, but this is the general framework. Since my work, our concern is earning of Indian adults. So before going there, maybe it's better to take a quick look at the Indian labor market. Of course, it is showing a persistent increase in wage inequality, particularly since the post-liberalization era, since the mid-90s. And one of the stylized fact of Indian labor market is the abysmally low rate of female labor force participation, and that rate is even falling since the onset of century. Besides, in spite of being the country with the largest share of young population, the share of young adults is also getting stagnant or actually falling, although this can be a result of higher access to higher education. So, however, the stagnancy and even the shrinking of the already crippled formal labor market in India is a verified fact. And for this reason, the growth regime in India has often been criticized as being jobless because it is unable to create enough job opportunities, at least in the formal labor market. However, since we are concerned about unfairness in earning distribution, so our fairness in earning distribution, so our motivation is the existing unfairness. Of course, there is ample evidence of gender wage discrimination in regular salaried and other kind of jobs, low amount of intergenerational mobility in terms of education, health, and even earning is a verified fact as well. So in this backdrop, we will study inequality of opportunity because I think it is still not being adequately studied. I can mention 3 studies actually. 2 of them belong to in 2012. One by Sadullah and Yalonsky. They studied educational opportunity by a number of different indices. On the other hand, Singh in 2012, he has studied income opportunity with IHDs database. And very recently, he also has co-authored with the same database, but for Indian women, earning opportunity for Indian women. Now, in this context, I do think that the existing studies on India leaves us enough room for improvement. And I have used the latest available labor force survey, thereby providing the latest estimate until 2019. Besides, I will apply the recently used machine learning approach in identifying the vulnerable sections of the society in this context. Besides, there are many data-related problems. One of the data-related problem is the missing information of certain circumstance backgrounds, which I will talk about too here by another method. And of course, because of using the latest labor force survey, we have disaggregated data on different kind of employment categories: regular employment, casual employment, self-employment. So we will do a disaggregated analysis of inequality of opportunity on the basis of that. So for that purpose, we have taken data from the periodic labor force survey, the 2 rounds, we coupled them together, and that's our data for the sample. Now, those who were present in my earlier talk, I don't know how many old CSHers there, they used to know that I love to present this output matrix to explain the basic idea of IOP, because I think it explains it very well. So the basic, the starting point is that we have to identify as many as circumstances given in the data set. Like I said, since effort is often observable, it is sufficient to get to know the circumstances. Once we have identified the circumstances, we divide the population into non-overlapping, mutually exclusive types by interacting the circumstances. We call them types. In our parlance, we call them types. Once we have types, once we have classified types, then we can actually write the entire output by this matrix where each row corresponds to a different type, which means individuals belonging to each row, they share the same type. And so, by definition of inequality of opportunity, it is inequality between the rows, because each different row differs by type, and we have to isolate inequality between the types and not within. Now, the last part that I have said, not within, for that we have to construct some kind of counterfactual distribution that can eliminate within type inequality and restore us between type inequality, so that we can measure inequality of opportunity without mess. So, this is one way, sorry, why it didn't change? Yeah. So this is one way of constructing a counterfactual. What we did is we simply collapsed the earlier matrix. We simply collapsed each row, which means each type of the earlier matrix, by their respective mean outcome, mean income, mean education, mean health, any outcome you can say. And thereby, by construction, we eliminate within type inequality. Now, if we measure inequality between these mean outcomes, we will eventually be measuring inequality arising from differences in circumstances, differences between the circumstances, not within the circumstances. And thereby, we can measure absolute inequality of opportunity by simply any inequality index of this counterfactual distribution. Like I said, we can use any inequality indices that are already there in the literature. However, since we are talking about a part of inequality, it is often more appealing to represent inequality of opportunity as the share of cholesterol of inequality in total inequality. For that matter, sometimes we divide this absolute measure by total inequality so that we can say, okay, this much percentage of inequality is really bad. This much percentage of inequality is inequality of opportunity. However, only one index for this, to represent IOP as a share of total inequality, the index has to satisfy a certain property called additive decomposable property, and only one index, the index of mean log deviation, satisfies this property, which has been widely used, therefore, in the literature of IOP, which I have here as well. But there is one possible drawback of this way of this methodology is the automatic partitioning of types. So what we are doing, we are taking all the circumstances. Suppose I have two circumstances, race and ethnicity, race and gender. I have two categories in each, black, white, and male, female. Then any automatic partitioning will leave us four types: black male, female, white female. However, it may be possible that black males are not that much responsible for the underlying inequality of opportunity, but black female does. The point is, we can make a relatively more organic partitioning of the population by adapting this machine learning approach of regression tree, which I was going to talk about now. Okay, so the concept is here, we submit the full set of circumstances. I will talk about what circumstances I will take in this particular study in a minute, but we'll submit the full set of circumstances to the program and let the algorithm, in particular the algorithm is the recursive binary splitting algorithm, let this algorithm choose the most significant interactions to form the types. So according to this algorithm, the interactions and which means the types will be chosen, unlike the auto-compartmentalization of types that I have just mentioned. And not only that, it further draws a hierarchical opportunity tree based on these interactions as suggested by the algorithm, where the initial node, it indicates the most important circumstance, and then the tree grows in interaction with possibly another circumstance, and the algorithm finds significance. So the tree grows likewise. So the terminal nodes, it can show us the particular interactions that leads to that node. So these branches of the tree now correspond to each type, unlike the automatic partitioning. Okay, so once we have the type, then inequality of opportunity is measured like I mentioned before, that each type is then represented by their mean outcome, and an inequality between the mean outcome, between the type mean outcome, will give us a measure of inequality of opportunity. The only difference with this method that I've told you is that the formation of types, which is much more organic here, like I said. Okay, so for that purpose, we have used wage earning data from PLFS. Wage is reported as a total amount received or receivable in cash for everyone this time in the Indian labor market. So we can categorize at least three kinds of workers. Casual workers are the daily laborers. In a word, they're the worst kind. They work on daily contractual basis. On the other hand, we have regular paid, regular salaried workers. They are paid on a regular monthly or weekly salary, but with or without contracts. Because of the huge informal sector of the Indian labor market, many of them are actually without any contract or job security. And then other than these two wage earners, we also have self-employed workers. That is also a very heterogeneous group. But on average, if we compare average earning, they're kind of in between casual and regular workers. They're better than the casual workers, worse than the regular workers. But that is not always true. That the regression tree will reveal as to which I'll come to the end. So we converted the wage earning, since they have to provide the data, the survey have to provide wages for every kind of workers. It is reported in daily terms, weekly terms, monthly terms. We converted all these wages to monthly wages and in the real value by using consumer price index. So while our outcome variable is real monthly wage, I have taken 5 circumstance variable, 3 categories of caste, usually the general forward caste as a topmost caste, OBC, other backward castes, and I have taken SC and ST together as one caste, one category. I have taken male and female gender categorization and 5 region of residence. Well, technically, I should have taken birth region because people can migrate, so it's not strictly out of their control. But due to the very, very low rate of inter-regional migration in India, I think I can take region of residence as a proxy for birth region. So I have excluded the special case of Northeast India and divided the rest of the country in 5 regions: Northeast, North, Central, East, South, West. Other than these 3 social backgrounds, I have also taken 2 variables of parental backgrounds: father's education, 5 categories of father's education, starting from illiterate to having tertiary level education taken, and 3 categories of father's occupation: white collar, blue collar, and agriculture. White collar occupation includes all kind of professional executions, and even the clerical jobs are included in white collar. Blue collars mostly include sales and service type of workers. Agriculture, other than including farmers, also includes hunter-gatherer or fishermen, this kind of jobs. But there is a problem. We do not have direct observation of father's education and occupation in the data set. Instead, this data is only available when the interviewee is interviewed along with the parent who is living with him or her. So we have an immediate co-residence bias. I mean, it's not very biased for India because co-residence is more common in India as compared to the Western countries, but still we will reduce significant sample size because of that. Usually the existing studies have dealt with this problem. For example, I was talking about the Sadulani case studies. They have sacrificed this parental background altogether because they were using the employment and employment access data. On the other hand, the other 2 studies, they have used a different database, which the coverage is much lesser than the NSS database. Here, I'm using a third kind. I'm using NSS database as well as I'm incorporating parental backgrounds. By this, well, IOP analysis is very demanding on the data set. It is kind of, everybody agrees that. So instead of sacrificing important variables or instead of pretending a bad data set as a good one, we can improvise things. So here, what I have done is I have used the popular technique of multiple imputation to solve this missing data problem. I see it as a missing data problem that parental backgrounds is missing because it is simply not asked. So I will just sketch out the process very briefly. The idea is that first we take our working sample by some sample control. For me, it is simply age. I have taken all who are aged between 18 to 45. So we have taken our sample. Then we think of our sample as an union of 2 parts. One part for which information on parents are directly observable. They're the people who are living with their parents. For them, the parental background information is there. We call it the response part. On the other hand, those who are not living with their parents, so parental background for them is not covered in the survey. We call it the non-response part. And the idea of multiple imputation is to use information from the response part so as to simulate the same information in the non-response part, thereby generating a complete data set where we have no missing information. So it kind of, the execution is like that. So we have 2 variables for that: father's education and occupation, and they're regressed. They're predicted by a suitable econometric model. In my case, since they're categorical variable, I have used multinomial logic. And the important point of this imputation model is that while predicting these variables, father's education and occupation, we should take the predictors that are non-missing for the entire data set. And once we have the predicted value, we simulate this predicted value for the entire sample multiple times, thereby generating multiply completed data set where no information is missing. Then inequality of opportunity is calculated for each completed data set, and we take an average of IOP as a final measure. However, there is an important assumption behind the goodness of multiple imputation, which is a missing at random assumption, which means that probability of missingness is the missing information is simply a result of non-response of survey design, which means the probability of missingness, it does not depend on any hidden mysterious factor, but it is within the scope of the survey, which cannot be tested. From its very definition, it is clear it cannot be tested, but can only be reasonably assumed, which I think is reasonable enough to assume for India, because if we look at the co-resident and the difference between the co-resident and the non-co-resident part, we can see that those who are living with their parents, they're on average, they're younger, they're more male, of course, because of female migration. However, their caste share, the share of casual workers, it does not change much. Their average wage earning is also very similar. So I don't want to go on saying that. My point is, whatever difference, I'm not saying that they're not different, but the point of multiple imputation to be a good exercise is that whatever difference there is within the limit of the survey, not outside the scope of the survey. We can see the differences. As long as that is happening, we are good to do multiple imputation. Okay, so I'll go this part very quickly. Before going to the result, let me just quickly summarize my data. Like I said, my only sample control is the age control. I have taken all those who are aged between 18 to 45. I have chosen this age bracket because they have a substantial portion of people living with their parents, as well as substantial portion of them are actually working. So, this age bracket keeps a good balance between co-residence as well as wage availability. The share of casual workers is 24% and 38% each in regular and self-employed workers. However, we have to sacrifice a portion of self-employed workers who are a very important part of employment. They are unpaid family workers, but they have reported zero wage because they're unpaid. So we have to sacrifice them. But however, they constitute like 11% of all those who are employed. Although the rural-urban ratio is like 60-40, but as far as wage working is concerned, as far as employment is concerned, 53% of our sample are from rural India, so it's not very rural skewed. And most of them, half of them are actually in sales and service type of worker, and very few of them begin college, although all of them nearly have some kind of schooling experience, but very few of them have higher studies. It also reflects one of the very stylized fact of Indian economy, Indian labor market, which is the persistent low rate of female labor force. 79 to 84% of all my sample, irrespective of the employment category, consist of males. If we look at region-wise, obviously casual workers, they have the highest share from South India. On the other hand, the poor states of Eastern India, they have the lowest regular salaried earners. Self-employment, on the other hand, they're mostly from Central India, probably because it is the agricultural belt of the country. Casual workers, as expected, they are least educated. They're mostly rural. But in these cases, often it is seen that a lack of formal training have been counterbalanced by indigenous training or other kind of training. In spite of that, we see that only 12% of casual workers, they have some kind of vocational training. Others do not have any kind of training at all. And there has been a crowding of middle and lower castes in daily contractual laborers. Regular workers, on the other hand, obviously they are better paid, better educated, mostly white-collar job, and they're also more likely to live with their parents while they're earning, actually. And but due to the informal nature of Indian labor market, in spite of being regularly paid, 30 to 40% of the regular salaried workers, they are still not eligible to take paid leave or they have any kind of written contract or so. Self-employed workers, on the other hand, they are little more rural and their share of agricultural occupation is relatively higher as compared to other two workers. But other than that, from the descriptive statistics, we cannot say much about the self-employed workers. Okay, so now the results. Here I present the inequality of opportunity index measure by the non-parametric methodology that I have first described. So by full model, I mean that I have taken all the circumstances, the three social backgrounds, caste, gender, region of residence, as well as father's education and father's occupation, all the 5 circumstances and all of their interaction. That will generate me 450 types altogether. So on the basis of this full model, we can see that a relative share of inequality of opportunity is 30.4%, which means that a minimum of 30% of earning inequality is pretty unfair and objectionable, since it is generated by differences in circumstances alone. How bad this 30% number is, I will come to that at the end of the presentation. Further, notice that self-employed persons, self-employed workers, they have the worst earning opportunity with the highest level of inequality of opportunity. In fact, if you notice the inequality measure at the top, I measured the inequality. So it's like the total inequality index. The self-employed workers and the regular workers, their inequality is very similar. One is 0.278, another is 0.28. They're very close to each other. So earning inequality is very close between the regular and the self-employed workers, but earning opportunity is much worse for self-employed workers. as compared to the regular workers. However, if we play around with different truncated version of the model, taking one or more circumstances at a time and leaving some behind, it may indicate the relative importance of different circumstances. For example, if I take caste alone, then we can see that none of the casual, regular, self-employed workers, they have IOP more than 6%. On the other hand, if we take particularly for casual workers, it's like 1%. So they have, if we have only caste in our data set, we will conclude on almost equal opportunity among the casual workers, because there is almost no inequality of opportunity due to caste. But if you take gender along with caste, it jumps by quite some extent for casual and self-employed workers, but only a little for regular workers, indicating that probably gender matters more for casual and self-employed workers, but relatively less for regular salaried earners. So the point is, but notice also that as long as I go on taking circumstances that matters, that have some kind of effect on outcome, it will increase inequality of opportunity mathematically, because we are basically partitioning the population into finer and finer types. So it will automatically increase inequality of opportunity. The point is, we can investigate the extent of increase to gauge at their relative importance for different kind of workers. However, even after considering all the three social backgrounds, none of them are imputed: caste, gender, and region of residence. We can see that for all workers, if we take all workers together, IOP is like 14.7%. It is still, I don't remember exactly, but probably it is still less than France, I think so, with kind of equal things. So my point is, it is still considerably less than the full model. So sacrificing parental background would cost us. We will severely underestimate the share of unfair inequality in India, particularly for regular earners. It is only 7.3% if we take all the social backgrounds, if we sacrifice parental backgrounds, right? So, I mean, for regular workers, as far as I remember, it is even better than Sweden. Now, India's regular earners cannot be better than Sweden, but hence is the reason for this entire exercise to consider parental background information in the exercise. On the other hand, if we take parental backgrounds alone, then we can see, okay, it's still a severe underestimation, 18% of IOP, particularly for casual workers, it is very less, although not for regular and self-employed workers. All these things together indicate that probably parental education and, parental backgrounds, both education and occupation, they matter more for regular earners and self-employed earners, but relatively less for casual earners. But we can say much more if we explore it through the regression tree, the hierarchical order of circumstances, which is next. So this is the tree for all workers. I'm extremely sorry that it's not very visible. How can I make it visible? No.
It's a PDF, right? So you can.
Oh, okay. I cannot. I can zoom it.
PDF, yes. Or you can just read it out.
So yes. So it's father's education. It's still not visible from here. Okay, let me just read it out. Better. So you have to believe me that the box I circled, it says father's education for all workers together. So therefore, father's education has been pointed out as the most important circumstances. Now, I have to mention that, however, while the point estimates of IOP that I have just explained, it has been calculated as an average of 5 imputed dataset for the time being. However, it is difficult to exercise the same for regression tree. Instead, what we have done here, we have taken the median value of education and occupation and take that median value as our circumstances to draw the tree. Okay, first, like I said, father's education observes that if we consider all workers, all employed person except the unpaid family workers, father's education has been turned out as the most important circumstances, a similar trend that is also prevalent in the existing literature, not only for developing countries, but also for developed countries. So everybody who lies right to this line, they have average earning worse than those lying to the left. That's why I'm saying they're better. However, so here just let me explain. Each of this branch is now correspond to a type. So unlike the previous case where we are basically taking the product of all the circumstances and form our types, here the type is formed by the tree, and all these branches are different. So all the types are also different, right? And each of these boxes, the small tiny boxes, they write the average earning of the type, the branch corresponding to this. So this, for example, here it is not visible. It is general, upper caste, all those whose fathers are in white collar occupations and they have above school level education, actually below tertiary level or above education. So they form the base type. On the other hand, at this end, they're the females whose fathers have below primary level education and they're from agricultural family. They're being selected as the worst type when I'm considering all workers together. Of course, this hierarchical order differs with the type of employment. For example, if I take casual workers, here the circle point is gender. So female daily workers on average, they have lesser earning opportunity as far as casual working, daily contractual labor is concerned. Being female is more disadvantageous. Except for here, I have a small group of northern upper caste females. Their average earning is better than some of the males in the agricultural sector, actually. I do not know, it is kind of surprising. I do not know this small but privileged group where from they appear, what is the reason behind their relative advantage. But apart from that, females are always earning less than males as far as casual working is concerned. And notice that although fathers' backgrounds are relatively less important for casual workers, but they make more of an appearance for males. I mean, fathers' education and occupation, they're making more of an appearance when samples are males rather than when samples are females. Right? For regular workers, as expected, all the top 2-3 nodes are basically consisting of fathers' education and occupation. So as expected and as also indicated by our point estimates, parental background, both education and occupation, it matters more for regular salaried workers. Interestingly, note that the appearance of caste, it appears when fathers' education are more favorably distributed. When fathers are relatively more educated, they have below tertiary level or above education, caste matters, caste makes an appearance, there is an upper caste premium. On the other hand, when fathers are relatively less educated, they have below primary level education, we can see a female disadvantage. In fact, speaking of caste, I should actually this. So you can see that I have circled these two parts. So the blue circled one, they are all the upper castes, not all the upper caste regular earners whose fathers are in white collar job, but sorry, they are all the middle caste. They are OBC and SC/STs whose fathers are in white collar job, but they have tertiary level education. On the other hand, the red circle part, they're the upper caste. Their fathers are also in white collar job, but they have just a notch below education level. They have not started college. But the upper caste premium is quite small between them. Here, the upper castes are earning, their monthly average earning is 24,400 something. On the other hand, 454. And the middle and the lower castes here, their average earning is 24,445. So there is almost no upper caste premium. In spite of both the middle castes and the upper caste, they have fathers in white collar occupation. The only difference is that the upper castes are from family where fathers are a little bit less educated. And OBC and SC/ST, their fathers have some kind of college level education. So this I have also seen when I'm taking all the workers together that caste makes an appearance. So there you can see clear upper caste premium when fathers are relatively more educated or they're in a better paid job. On the other hand, when fathers are in agriculture or they're relatively less educated or even illiterate, then female disadvantage is like more prominent. For the self-employed worker, however, of course, father's education here as well turned out as the most important circumstances. But as compared to the regular earners, gender of a person matters more for self-employed people, self-employed earner, with female disadvantage. Even if we can see that females who have some favorable other backgrounds, like their fathers are more educated, their fathers are in better paid job, So these are the females. The blue dots are the females. Their fathers are in white-collar job and more educated, but still their average earning, which is circled by this blue, it is less than the males whose fathers are in agricultural job and also lesser educated. So the female disadvantage is self-employed work is even kind of worse. I mean, in some cases, even with other favorable distribution, females are still earning less. So I can go on explaining different branches of the tree, but instead it will be simple to compare the best and the worst that has been the best and the worst type that has been generated by the tree. By best, I mean that I take the two most advantageous branches that has been generated by tree. So for example, for regular workers, these are the two branches. So these two, all these people, they form my best group. And these people are all the upper caste regular earners whose fathers have tertiary level education. On the other hand, all these people form my worst type. They are the female regular earners whose fathers have below primary level education or their fathers are illiterate. So this is just an example of regular workers. Likewise, I form all the best and the worst type for all different kind of workers. So for example, for casual workers, the best group are the males from North and South India who have literate fathers, whereas the best group for regular earners, they're all the upper caste regular earners who have tertiary educated fathers, and likewise. So the best types and the worst type, obviously they differ with the employment category, but notice the presence of females in each of this category. Females are always part of the worst category, irrespective of the employment category. They are always part of the worst type. So what I did is, instead of, so far I have been using type mean distribution, outcome to estimate inequality of opportunity. Instead, what I did, I plot their entire distribution of the best and the worst type. So this, the darkest shade here correspond to the self-employed workers, and the lightest shade correspond to the casual workers. The middle shade in between are the regular workers. And the solid lines represent the best types that I have just explained, and the dashed line represent the worst types. Now, first notice that the solid lines, which means the best types, they're always lying to the right of the dashed line. So means that the best types, not only the tree says that the average earning of the best type is better than the average earning of the worst type, obviously, but it's not only the average earning. The entire distribution of the best type is far right to the dash distribution of the worst type. So there is considerable earning gap between the best and the worst type. And by best and worst type, I mean not some automatic partitioning. I mean the best and the worst type that has been generated by the trees, right? So that is the first thing. Second thing is the gap between the best and the worst, which means the gap between the solid and the dashed line is highest for the darkest shade, and the darkest shade correspond to the self-employed workers. So as indicated by the point estimates, which shows almost 35% inequality of opportunity for self-employed, we are also seeing that by regression tree with a completely different type and different partitioning, we can also see that the earning gap between the best and the worst type among the self-employed workers are worse as well, even by the robust comparison of all throughout the distribution, not just by the mean. And lastly, we can actually see a clear ranking among the best types. For example, this corresponds to the regular wage workers. They are clearly to the right of the self-employed workers. So among the best types, the best kind of regular workers are even better than self-employed workers, who in turn are better than the casual workers. However, for the worst types, for the dashed line, the worst kind of regular workers are still doing better than that of self-employed and the casual workers. But the other two groups, their distribution actually crosses. We cannot really say that the worst kind of self-employed workers are better or worse than the worst kind of casual workers. But we can say that when for the best types. So the best layer of self-employed workers are better than the best layer of casual worker, but the worst layer of self-employed worker are not necessarily best than the worst layer of casual workers, right? So just wrapping up, in the backdrop of evident labor market discrimination, our aim is to evaluate earning inequality through the lens of distributive justice, and we do so by adapting the methodology from this course of equality of opportunity. And with the set of most commonly used and most widely used circumstances, our aim is to provide a comparable estimate on India so that we can position India in the global map, about which I'll come to in a second. A further disaggregated analysis reveals that the self-employed workers, who are one of the least studied group in India because of data availability and all, it shows highest inequality of opportunity. In spite of similar earning inequality, self-employed workers have worse earning opportunity than the regular earners, than the regular salaried workers. Indeed, some authors have actually found that the share of low-paid workers are highest among the self-employed, or even the self-employed women, they have lesser perception of remuneration. So earlier in NSS database, they used to ask a question, are you self-employed? So if they say yes, they ask, do you consider your earning to be remunerative? If they say yes, then they give an income bracket. So is your remuneration falls in that region or in that region? Likewise. So from that data, this paper, Chandrasekhar and Ghosh, it's not a paper actually, it's an article. They have analyzed that while 50% of the men, they have said that a minimum remuneration, a minimum monthly remuneration of 2,000 to 2,500 is remunerative for them. Only 25% females say so, which means that 75% females are happy to be self-employed below a monthly remuneration of 2,000 rupees. And I was talking about this like 15 years ago database, 2004-5 database, I think. So the perception of women self-employed, the perception of monetary returns on their wage is also very low. And of course, one of the main aim of this paper is to identify the vulnerable section by the machine learning approach here. We find that the worst types who have the least earning opportunity are those always who are from the lesser educated family background, except for the casual workers, where being born a female is more of a disadvantage than being born to an illiterate family. The regression tree further reveals that females, like I said, they are always part of the worst type, irrespective of the employment category. They are always, some kind of females are always at the bottom layer for casual workers, regular workers, self-employed workers, everybody. Finally, it is interesting to observe that the upper caste premium holds when other family backgrounds are also favorable, which means, like I said, that when fathers are relatively more educated and better paid, we can see an upper caste premium. On the other hand, when other family backgrounds are relatively less favorably distributed, we see a female disadvantage. So this observation, I believe it has some important implications to research in the caste gender nexus. However, no study is without limitations. So I should mention some of the important caveats. However, they are not limited to my work, but rather in general to the discourse of inequality of opportunity as well. First of all, this analysis, this way of analyzing inequality takes a moral stand. It takes a moral judgment to identify these are the circumstances, these are the factors that are beyond control, and these are not. And who are we to decide that? Because it differs with sociocultural norms and etc. etc. But even if we take that aside, even if we put that outside the bracket, another big problem is that even if we agree on what circumstances to consider, it is impossible practically to accommodate all factors that are beyond control. So there have to be omitted circumstances. So we better interpret our results as the absolute lower bound of inequality of opportunity. That is the minimum amount of inequality of opportunity that should be prioritized, that should be equalized immediately. The actual inequality of opportunity is much, much higher because we are missing a lot of circumstances here. So that's one way of tackling the omitted circumstances. Obviously, the better way to tackle it is to take as many circumstances possible. But since it is very demanding on the informational content of the dataset, that's the best we can do. And of course, another major thing to mention here is that these circumstances, they can affect the income through many different channels. So in belief formation, in their choice of work, in skill formation, these kind of things are also not accommodated in the inequality of opportunity rubric, right? So the model is simply unable to accommodate them. But still outlining even only a few but important circumstances is often sufficient to illustrate the lower bound of obvious inequality of opportunity in a country. And in our estimates, we see that 30% inequality of opportunity in India that prevails in 2017-19. That comes as a result of 450 different typologies with a host of circumstances. It is considerably higher than the existing estimates. For example, the seen in 2012 has estimated 20% income opportunity for Indian men, and later on in 2019 they have rechecked it for Indian women with the IHDs 2012 data, and it turned out as the same 20%. On the other hand, with my estimates, India is basically closer to the worst performing Latin American countries, at least on the measure of 2017-18, the latest PLFS data. I will end with this slide. This is a borrowed figure. So this probably is until now the only study that gathers more or less comparable estimates of income opportunity from around the world. Most of them, and if I'm not wrong, all of them are actually measured by the index of mean log deviation and kind of similar methodology. Of course, with different circumstances, we have to take these qualifiers out because it depends heavily on what types, how you're partitioning your population, etc., etc. But taking those qualifiers outside the bracket, you can see that at the top there are Norway, there are Finland, Hungary, even Poland. On the other hand, at the bottom there are Brazil, Panama, Guatemala. Now, the oldest study of India places it here, which is right below at the middle level, in the 2012 study, which means it studied IHDs with 2004-5 data. So this is a situation of India in 2004-5. And all I did is I take India down in 2017-19 here. So that's with this, I stop here. Yes. Thank you all for your attention.
I'm sure the floor is yours for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Tista, if you would like to unshare.
Okay.
That's fine. Let me thank Tista for this excellent presentation, which was quite dense, and but it has important implications for not just people who are working in economics, but other circumstances as well. And I must thank her for presenting it in a manner which is understandable to most, I'm assuming, and making it as simple as possible. Because it's quite a complicated issue, which is still work in progress in a sense, simply because even for established scholars of inequality, the idea of quantifying and in fact to give a number to inequality of opportunity is not a very simple task. Essentially because we are talking about circumstances, we are talking about qualitative factors which operate not in a linear fashion, but work in a very different, multidimensional fashion, with combinations which are not very easy to summarize. In a sense, caste and gender are completely separate categories in a sense. And therefore, to bring them together is not something which is very easy. So there are limitations which are already talked about. And there are certainly limitations as far as the number of circumstances or the kind of types that she can bring in. And for example, you can have caste, gender, you can have all of these issues. And then you can add religion to it, which is an important issue, for example. You can have one of the things which I thought would be, and these are more in terms of suggestions, for example, without adding to the computational liability in that sense, is to would be, say, for example, the rural-urban distribution. That's something which is much more important than, say, for example, the clubbing together of states as South, East, and because I think the rural-urban dichotomy is far more serious, would have actually added to the whole.
So it's rural-urban as a circumstance?
As a circumstance. Rather than using because right now what you're doing is that you're clubbing with the states, but in the process you're clubbing together rural and urban together. That's something which is, I think, is problematic in a sense, because rural and urban are completely separate categories. There is no home.
What if I add to rural urban to the
but that depends on whether you can, I mean, your computational liability increases.
No,
yeah. Because you can keep on adding. For example, you can have a combination of caste plus religion. I mean, that is something which again will give you a completely different kind of flavor. the discrimination is not just on the basis of caste, but also on the basis of religion. And that will, you can create 8 categories, 9 categories in that sense. You will find a completely different picture. But you see, if you keep on adding circumstances, then the possibility that these numbers keep on increasing. The more and more will get captured in terms of IOP. Right now, what you're looking at 30%, it will may probably go up and may go up even further as we keep on. And that happens primarily because of the nature of heterogeneity which is there in India. And therefore, comparing it with, we should compare it with Finland and others. But compared to a more homogeneous society, to a more heterogeneous society divided on various categories, it automatically will add to that IOP. That's something which is a given. So I don't think you should be defensive about that. I think it's something which is, it has to be higher. It must be higher. It can't be the same. If that is the same, then the whole premise on which sociologists and political scientists and anthropologists have been working is something which is questioned. In a sense, there is these have important implications for a person's ability to access labor market, access employment opportunities, or even access education. So I don't think they should be defensive on that. I think you should, it is in the right direction. In fact, I'm going to ask you to make it more, add to the pool rather than try and reduce it. That's, I think, is in terms of methodologically. The second, I think, methodological issue, which is an important issue, which you have been struggling with, and you talk to me about it, is the issue of imputations. Now, that's something which is fair enough, provided we assume that the distribution of households of co-residents is at least equivalent in that sense of the distribution of households in terms of characteristics. But if that is not the case, which is what is, at least in terms of age, you can see that the average age of the people who are co-residents is around 27, 28, whereas those who are not co-residents is close to 36, 37, which is like, and it normally happens. I mean, like before marriage, or if you're very much close to immediately after marriage, you stay, but after that you separate out. But it can also be because of a generational change. In the sense, here you're talking about individuals who are close to the co-residents in that sense are roughly 9 to 10 years, 8 to 9 years further, younger. And therefore, the choice of occupational baskets that is available to them is different from the choice of occupational basket which is available to somebody who is 10 years back. That can happen because of changing economy. That can happen because of changing circumstances. That can happen because of changing labor market distortions. That can happen because of various factors. For example, a lot of IT sector jobs were not available. It suddenly came in, and suddenly there are a lot of people who are there in the IT sector. It wasn't existing. I mean, if you compare it, say, this boom, for example, the delivery guys or the gig workers that we're talking about. This is all a very sudden and rapid change that we're talking about. Yes, you're clubbing together in a blue collar, white collar will reduce those ones. But my advice would be to check. I mean, do the same thing for the co-residents separately, and then with this model. And if you find there is substantial difference between those numbers, then I think you should try and improve your model. It can be better. Right now, we don't know whether the truncated sample is going to give you the same kind of result or not.
No, they are not actually, because like you said, because of this, they're not going to give us the same, idea, because their characteristics are different.
That's what I'm saying. So that is why we have to be very careful about it, whether the model, in a sense, are we losing out on something? I mean, because what we're talking about, the characteristics being different, those characteristics are very important predictors of IOP. And those characteristics need to be at least specified. You just mentioned that this is how we are getting it. And that can happen. That's a natural process. In the sense, no economy is static. I mean, like we didn't think about Uber workers, Uber drivers, or the delivery guys or the e-commerce 10 years back. And therefore, obviously, things have changed. And therefore, the opportunities have changed. And therefore, the who gains and who loses is again something which is determined by factors which are not just driven by your parental and your circumstances, which you're talking about, circumstances in terms of social and political circumstances or economic circumstances, but also because of macro factors, which we are not building in the model. It's right now, everything which is individual circumstances that we're talking about. We're not talking about the changing circumstances of the economy as such. So I think it's, you can see, I mean, if it is not making, I mean, or maybe you can improve the prediction so that there's not much of a difference between those two characteristics. That's one thing which I wanted. The final comment in that sense, and which is something which is, because I want others to also comment on this, is this whole idea of inequality of opportunity itself. I mean, you have said it very clearly that because of the fact that the efforts are unobservable, there is no way we can bring it in that sense. But you looking at, in the sense, are we in some ways putting too much on the circumstances at the cost of efforts? And that's why I'm telling you, in the sense, for some occupations, for example, in agriculture, those circumstances and the ability to move out of agriculture require not just parental education, but also endowments. That is why you see, when you're looking at casual workers is the one which is least endowment demanding, or least education demanding in that sense. That is why you see the contribution of parental occupation and parental education is almost negligible. It's the least. Whereas when you go to regular workers, which is where you require education, and then you find that this is something which becomes important. So it's the nature of job, which is what is defining to what extent that is going on. And it is true, because the regular workers are more, casual workers by this calculation are more homogeneous lot, because they are the ones who require least amount of skill, least amount of endowments, least amount of education, least amount of everything. And the only way the differential that you see is because female wages are lower than male wages for the same amount of work and same kind of. That's the only thing that determines. When you come to the regular workers, the gradation or the gradient is very steep. And that gradient is where education becomes an important determining factor. That is why what you see is that there is a highest proportion that comes from parental education. When you go to self-employed, which again is a very heterogeneous category, right from a rickshawala to Mukesh Ambani, you see that endowments matter a lot for self-employed, and therefore that, but we don't have that characteristics which is inbuilt in that. So I think the analysis in that sense is coming out to be much more in line with what we would say. But when you're trying to put in the parental education and things, that is only relevant for irregular workers, unless we're bringing endowments where the self-employment workers are going. For casual workers, this is what your results show. But one positive outcome of that, which is what I didn't hear the word, which I think we should have been able to mention, that within the regular workers, the caste factor is least relevant.
Within the regular workers?
It's only 1%.
No, it's for casual workers.
For casual workers is no, but in
but also for all of them actually.
It's a very but in a sense, to what extent has the reservation part, which is where I was coming to, reservation is only important for regular workers. It is absolutely irrelevant for. So is it that the reservation, in a sense, has made a difference? And it basically increase the inequality of opportunity or reduce the role of caste in that sense. I mean, casual workers, obviously, because this doesn't require anything in that sense. But compared to self-employed, the fact that caste has lower contribution compared to, is it because of reservation? Is something that can be a good way of putting it, that because the public policies, has it basically increased the inequality, inequality of opportunity, or reduced the inequality of opportunities? Ideally, it should. And we have had 70 years of reservations. It should reduce the inequality of opportunities. And what I could figure out is that it does come out from your classification that it is not something which is completely insignificant. It's something which needs to be brought on, because that's where it matters. At least in government jobs, it will matter. Even for other ones, the second generation people whose fathers were beneficiaries of reservation, that for them it will matter. Because when you are talking about these are circumstances, gender, caste as reservations, then we must also be looking at what impact the policies had, which try to reduce the inequality of. And I think you have a story there, which you bypassed, in a sense, not looked at carefully. But I think you have a story which if you can slice it out more carefully, then you might actually get it. For example, even if you break the regular employment by public and private, which is what is available. So what you do is that you break down the regular workers as regular workers who are there in public employment, who are there in private employment, and then see if there is a difference. If you see that the inequality of opportunity is higher, I mean, in the private one compared to the public one, then you can safely say that yes, reservation policies have worked. Or for example, men and women also, gender policies have worked or not. It's not something which is it's possible, but it is that can be worked out. So I would like it to go a step further from the results, which are already quite robust, quite strong. But you can actually, in terms of presenting the results, you have a very neat story which can be more fine-tuned and can be done. And then it will have an important bearing on a lot of discussion that is currently going on in terms of inequality of opportunities that we're talking about. As of now, I don't want to burden with more and more work that you should be doing, but I must say that this is something which is a good work, something that needs more. You have already a story which can be built on. You can actually adding to the story, and that is something which is definitely worth putting it out, disseminating further, because I think I at least have a hunch that you have a story religion aspect of it, and there is curiosity to know that what is happening as those front. You might have a story that's really worth disseminating. Thank you.
Yeah. So the floor is now open to questions from the audience. So for those of you who are online, please do not hesitate to raise your hand. You can also leave a message in the chat and try to keep a track of it. You can of course also have questions coming from people here, and I see that there's already Stephanie who wants to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. This time I say that this was a very dense presentation, and also, of course, I'm an economist, so I had to make a lot of efforts to, get into your way of tackling things. So I may have misunderstood some important things, but I have two questions. The first is, what is it that surprises you most in your findings, in your result? What is it that you least expected when you started the research? And the second question is, did I understand you correctly that gender seems to trump caste as a factor of inequality of opportunity, that gender is more important than caste? It's probably an oversimplistic way of putting it. But if that is the case, and when you compare it with, when you compare India with other countries, is it something specific to India? I was really surprised to hear you say again and again that gender is the most discriminating factor. That's how I interpret what you said, and I hope I'm not completely off the mark.
Maybe do you mind if we take another question from here? So I can see that Firdaus Malik has a question. Would you like to? We will ask you to unmute, and you may ask your question if you wish.
Yes, thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, actually, I want to congratulate the candidate that it is, really a wonderful study. I have, 2 pointers. I want to take, 2 seconds to discuss them. Then I will, put my question, forward. There, as sir has, discussed the query that no one should go with this rural and urban divide to check rural and urban divide. It will be more, convenient rather than go with the regional one. But I think the regional one is more strong because, if we look, there is one study of RBI, which is talking about that there is regional inequality in India, that south and, north region is, they are more, dominated by inequality. They are, talking in that paper, agriculture inequality. But therein, there is a perception that there is always that difference between rural and urban. But you can, add the rural and urban, but the strong evidence of your, inequality, measuring the inequality and earning this, it will be, more completed with this regional one. So now my straightforward question is that, as we are talking about income inequality and earnings, so there is risk and uncertainty in the, lives of the people, as we have seen the current pandemic. Have you measured any risk and uncertainty, cause or, case which represents this, inequality, income inequality more? As have you taken any such evidence or any break that which reflect more or similarly that what is the position of inequality. I think
If you do, maybe if you could type down your question, because your voice is little muffled and we have little difficulty to understand what you are saying. So if you could maybe write it down in the chat, it'd be easier for Tista to navigate your question.
yes, sure, sir.
Sure. Can I ask a very quick
Yeah,
question? So, as a historian, I mean, so the data set that you worked with must correspond to, was built at a certain period of time, at a certain date. When was that picture taken, if I may say?
Yeah, it's
And do you have comparable data sets for earlier periods, especially in my Himanshu's later points, where he says that new job opportunities have come up, and it's indicating the last decade, and so that may also have transformed inequality of opportunities. So, is there any possibility for you to compare with an earlier period?
I can compare. So it is a PLFS data. It has just started on 2017. I can roughly compare it with earlier NSS data set. But I don't know.
It's part of
this
your
will-
PhD, so you can actually.
It's part of my PhD, but their sample
No,
survey
it's-
design is a little bit different.
Not bad.
Second
No, no,
stage straight
you
amount
can
different.
fully
So we can.
Fully
No,
compare.
the point is, it is the present paper is a snapshot. It has no picture of comparison, so it's just showing a portion of Indian economy. So, but yeah, it's a good idea to compare. In
She
fact, I
has
did
worked
that
on-
in my PhD.
Yeah, she has worked in 2011, 12.
Yes,
And I think
in
she
my
can do it as
PhD.
fully compare.
Sorry.
So regarding Stephanie, so what? So these two, your two questions are kind of related. It's not that gender is more important for all kind of workers. It's like I said, it's more important for the daily laborers. But what surprises me most is it also partly answers to, some of the Mangshu's point is that the caste gender nexus, it surprises me because caste is more relevant when parents are relatively educated and well occupied, and female disadvantage is more prominent when parents are agricultural or illiterate. So this is something, a new result that's been brought about by the regression tree type, and I'm very interested in this. Other results, well, honestly saying, it didn't surprise me because, like Manshu said, it's very likely that workers will have very impact of their parents' education and all, because their own return to education in their returning is very less. It's kind of expected that parental education will matter least for them. On the other hand, it will be the opposite for regular salaried workers. But this caste gender thing is kind of surprising. And
So, is it possible that caste matters less for head workers because most of them are in any case?
yes,
caste?
it is one possibility.
So that's why
Yes,
hierarchy
it is one.
is
80% of them are in. Yeah.
But it is the same for other education and other patient, no?
Yeah.
If they are all formal, that means that for you there is no.
That's the advantage to work with India, that you always have a full supportive distribution for every group. So you will find some fathers who are relatively, at least they have below secondary level education, even for casual workers. So you can work on statistical models, even after you have a heavy share of fathers who are illiterate. Maybe, in fact, for my case, it's like 60% of fathers there actually, they do not have any formal schooling experience for casual workers. But still, the statistical model is sound in spite of that. But yeah, in terms of discussion, it is definitely, certainly is a point. Most of them belong to the deprived background already.
So I think that those question is now on the chat box.
Okay,
So maybe I can read it out. Did you measure the case of risk and uncertainty cases in understanding income inequality during the crisis like pandemic?
Okay, so this, of course, I can if there is data available. Like I said, it is very much data demanding, data process. So if there is data available, yes, of course, we can do that. Yes.
Is there any question coming from the?
Can I comment on? I have.
Of course,
yes.
go ahead. Not even give the time to answer.
Yeah. I didn't get a chance to thank you for your nice comments. It will help me to write a paper actually. I would like to say that yes, adding the rural-urban angle to the region, but I would like to take the advice as adding it to the region of residence along with that, because otherwise my circumstances will shrink and it will
add it.
because the rural-urban addition would be good. Adding religion, I'm not sure how to win because there religion people can convert, right? Their religion, it's not strictly in that sense. I'm talking about adults, so they can convert to other religions anytime. So I don't know if I should take all possible combination. Maybe I should take out Muslims and then forward Hindus, OBC Hindus, and then Dalits, like that. So it's not like 8 groupings like you're talking about, maybe 4 or 5 instead of taking caste alone. Some kind of composition of religion and caste, so that Muslims can be separated out, because I think earning opportunity will be kind of different for them. Maybe not for Jains, Christians. They're very little portion. Yes, for Muslims we have to. For the forest caste, Hindus and the Muslims, OBC or SC/ST doesn't matter. It will bring some more juice to the story. Maybe.
But sorry, if you do that, does it mean that you would? I mean, like right now, is caste taken into consideration for Muslims, because there's always a
Yes,
question.
yes,
So,
yes.
How does it work in your data set right now?
It's
And how would you do it if you were to include the religion criterion?
So I'll just take forward caste Hindus, forward caste OBCs, and I'm sorry, forward Hindu forward caste, Hindu OBCs, Hindu SCs, and Muslims. All those
no,
ones.
no,
You can't- you can't
do
have
things.
the
Do it
Muslim
like this. General Hindu,
Huh.
general Muslim,
Yeah,
OBC Hindu, OBC Muslim,
exactly. You need
and SC/ST will not have classification.
yeah.
Okay, so you want a general OBC classification among Muslims. I'm not sure how much.
I
Acha,
think-
So
okay.
general Muslim, general
Okay.
others,
Okay.
OBC Muslim, OBC others,
Hmm.
and then SC and ST. That's it. So basically from 4 you go to 6 classification.
Mhm.
Yeah, because among Muslims, it's simple, right?
They don't have SCs and
Yeah, no, they don't. But
so
OBC is
make
like-
it like 6 classification from 4 to 6. That's what it does.
Thank you. And regarding the effort factors, I don't know. I correctly understood it. You want to take me endowments as a circumstances, right? Because they differ in their endowment, the casual worker. So that's part of the circumstance.
That's part of it.
And how can I get it from the data? Of course, if I have data on endowment, sometimes I do have some information on land holding or something like that. That can proxy as endowment. But for others, I mean, particularly for urban samples, we do not have what can we proxy for endowment.
In rural land can be
In rural land can be, of course, it can be endowments, actually.
I'm saying that just as education is an enabler, endowment is also an.
Yeah, of
Land
course.
is also an.
Yes.
So it depends on if you have a land, you are farmer.
Yeah,
If you don't have land,
definitely.
you are
Definitely.
laborer. in
Yeah,
sense.
but-
Just as you are putting at education as one of the circumstances.
Mhm.
But even in the rural areas, if it is possible to do, when the land question is there.
Yeah, in the rural area, it is.
Yeah, so then just add that and see if it comes up as.
And yes, and I would like to say a few words about the co-resident and non-co-resident difference. The difference, the characteristic different, these two section of my sample, they are supposed to be there. These households are characteristically different. But the point is, I just want to mention that a multiple imputation thing, it is able to capture that difference. So what I can do, I can do a younger cohort, older cohort separate analysis. For the younger cohort, the weightage on multiple imputation will be much less than for 18 to 29 or 18 to 30 years. It will be like 70% of them are actually living with their parents. So the weightage will be much less. Because if I do a separate analysis for the co-resident and non-co-resident households, IOP is likely to be different. And the point is,
It will be different.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that you are making a strong assumption.
yeah.
That the reason is also because there is the difference is not co-resident and non-co-resident. There is a reason behind resident and not co-resident. As you grow older, you're likely that you will not have parents in living.
Exactly.
They would have died, or they would have moved out, or my family has expanded, I would moved out. So it is it's a different cohort. And if it is a different cohort, it is facing a different inequality of opportunity.
Yes, exactly.
So that is why if you when we're clubbing together, you're the one which is with co-resident is the one which is predicting the father's education and characteristics on the one which is where the sample where the information is missing.
Yes.
You're doing the characteristics from this one, putting it there, isn't it? But this characteristic itself may not be the correct predictor of that. It may be, may not be. We don't know because it's a counterfactual which none of us can figure out.
Yeah, that's the assumption of
That's the assumption.
Missing at random.
That's the assumption.
But
But in a sense, that assumption is valid as long as the employment profile remains the same. In a sense, if we assume that the employment probability of you getting employment in a particular category hasn't changed in the last 10 years or 15 years, 20 years, then that assumption may be valid. But if the macro picture itself has changed,
yeah, of course. But,
then
but that's not the job of imputation then.
that's what I'm saying.
Yes, I think,
Then it's just
bigger thing, yeah.
it's a point that has to be. That is why people are very choosy about it. It's not something. Not something. One of the things which I used to suggest to people who would come with this kind of a question, which is but it's very time consuming and very data intensive thing, is to instead of why you're fixated on the father as such, what if you do take the characteristics of the co-workers in the household, and for example your elder brother, two of the elder brothers. I mean, it's
They
not
are
just
part of my sample actually, so it will be a different research question then.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that if, for example, most likely a farmer's household will have a farmer, and if you can basically have a more likelihood of if the say elder brother or two of the elder brothers are, so you can actually look at the order of the children.
I have actually done it. How I did it is that instead of father, I focus on someone who is at similar age profile like the father, maybe uncle or something like that. I've done it, but it didn't improve the results much because it's still end of the day intergenerational co-residence, right? So there's no harm in this as well, right? That's why I choose this one. This is not sound statistically. That's what I found. That's my. And the reservation impact evaluation studies are actually very rare in IOP. That's why we. I mean,
but I think
it's one of the main. But
I'm saying that the whole idea of inequality of opportunity not just to, but also to look at if certain policies have added or.
Yes.
And I think if you have a story, I think it should come out.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Is there anything else that you want
No,
to
it's okay.
mention? Do we have more questions from the floor? I think otherwise it's actually, because we started a bit late, so we're already a bit late, but okay, I think. So let me, before we take a leave, I would just like to announce, excuse me, our next workshop will be on the 2nd May. It will be entitled Friendship in a Society Where Kings Are Kings, Sociality, Urban Transformations, and Gender Inequalities in a Small Indian City. This will be a presentation by Hugo Ribado-Dumas from the CSH, which will be followed by a discussion with Dr. Gopa Samantha from the University of Portland. So this will be on 2nd May at the same time. So thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session.